Good afternoon and welcome to the Tribal Justice Seminar project. This is an effort from UC Davis Law School along with the guiding hand of Chad Smith, who is a former principal chief for Cherokee and who is now the hands-on guide for this project. Uh, we welcome you and look forward to 12 weeks of visiting with you. Please understand this is a new process, so we are literally designing and building it as we go. So if you have suggestions about how to make it better, if you have comments about things that were distracting from what we do, if you have topics you would like us to address, please reach out. We want this to be a useful effort, and we want to be able to give you something that will help you in the tremendously important work you do in tribal justice systems. And UC Davis wants to acknowledge that they are located on the traditional lands of the Winton tribal nation. They understand that, and they are hopefully acting respectfully. Before we go further, I have the task of alerting all of you to a huge loss in the tribal justice community over the weekend. Judge Claudette White from Fort Yuma Krashan tribe passed away of COVID this weekend. She was a tremendous force, far outstripping her years with us. For those of you who saw the movie Tribal Justice, she was one of the two stars along with Judge Abby Abernathy. Judge White had just left the court as a newly elected council member for her tribe. And it's with a great deal of sorrow and loss that I want to acknowledge that she has passed from us, but she has left us a rich legacy, one focused on combining humanity and tribal culture and traditions and the legal system. That's not an easy combination, and yet she was the walking embodiment of that. So my condolences to her family and her community, and to all of us who have had a guiding light leave us. So I am going to put in the chat box an email for Chad, so that if you have comments, suggestions on how to do better, things that are problematic, you can reach him here. And I want to acknowledge John Miller, who is both an attorney and a tech wizard. John is our go-to guy to make sure that everything we're doing online works. So the goal of this effort is to build a tribal practice community, and an opportunity to learn from each other. So at different times, we may be inviting you to a chat room. And the idea of the chat room is basically to get to know who else is on this webinar. We have 157 people now. We have over 250 people registered. And our goal is to try and create a practice community where we all get together and learn from each other in order to serve our communities and our people better. So let me put one more email in the chat box. If you have technical issues, you can reach John at that address. One thing that Chad has arranged for us is that every seminar we will be giving away a Pendleton Yakima designed throw. So to qualify for that Pendleton, we ask that you complete a very short evaluation at the end of the session today. Those who complete that seminar, the evaluation for the seminar, will go into a pot and we will draw a name. If we have your contact information, we will reach out to you and let you know. And we will announce next week as well who is the winner and make arrangements to get that throw to you. So our speaker today is Chris Chaney. He's a member of the Seneca Cayuga Nation from Eastern Oklahoma. He has his Bachelor of Arts from University of Oklahoma and his Juris Doctor from BYU. Chris has a long, extensive resume of experience in a number of different systems that directly impact tribal communities and tribal justice systems. Chris was a prosecutor for a couple of different tribes, including the Jicarilla Apache and Southern Ute tribe. I got to know Chris when he was an assistant U.S. attorney in Salt Lake City. And I will tell you that some of my favorite Chinese lunch meals were shared with Chris, where we, between us, solved the problems of the world. Just nobody came to us for the answers that we came up with. Chris has since gone on to work in the federal government further, at both the Solicitor's Office, the Department of the Interior, and as General Counsel for FBI and the Tribal Justice Information Law Unit. So, as the saying goes, without further ado, let me introduce you to my friend Chris. After Chris is done, we'll open up the session for questions, and we'll go from there. So, Chris, go ahead and unmute yourself and take it away.
Well, thank you, Justice Thor, for the kind introduction. I appreciate that. And condolences to Judge White and her family. I was not aware of that. Yahweh Sigeno, I am glad that you are well and that we are here together today. My name is Chris Chaney. I am Haudenosaunee, which is also known as the Iroquois or the Six Nations. More particularly, I'm an enrolled member of the Seneca Cayuga Nation, as Justice Thorne indicated. I grew up on our tribe's small reservation in northeast Oklahoma. My traditional name is Gallejo Wasago, which means he who speaks the truth. So hopefully I can do that name justice today and pass along accurate information to you. I would like to thank Professor Chad Smith. He's been an old friend for, not old, but a friend for many years. And also Justice Thorne, who as he indicated, we've known each other for a long time. I'd also like to thank UC Davis School of Law for having me today. And most of all, I think I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to learn about using FBI databases to protect vulnerable persons in Indian country. Today I'm speaking to you from my, as Mary Lopez Kiefer from the California Attorney General's office knows as my basement office. I'm in Clarksburg, West Virginia, which is where the FBI CJIS facility is, but my basement office is where I do most of my business, including webinars and Zoom conferences and stuff since COVID has hit. And I'm looking forward to the time that COVID goes away and I can get back out on the road and get back out to Indian country. But for right now, I'm kind of confined to my basement office in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Clarksburg, West Virginia is also, in addition to being where FBIC CJIS is located, it is also the traditional lands of my tribe, the Seneca Cayuga Nation, and also the Eastern Chaney tribe and the Delaware tribe. Today I'll be talking about the Tribal Law and Order Act, exactly what is FBI CJIS, who can access FBI CJIS databases, legal, since this is a School of Law webinar, I wanted to talk about some of the legal authorities that allow tribal government officials to access the FBI CJIS systems for criminal justice purposes, but also for authorized non-criminal justice purposes. We'll talk about how the system is accessed, and then last of all, I'll talk about the DOJ Tribal Access Program. And so, Justice Thorne, Professor Smith, I'm going to try to pull up my PowerPoint, and if it's not working, let me know. I think I can get it going though. There, can you see that? Okay, see a thumbs up. So we'll be talking about tribal access to FBI databases, protecting vulnerable persons in Indian country. And basically, the way that the FBI CJIS systems can be utilized to protect people in Indian country is two ways. One is it allows tribal criminal justice agencies to access the FBI data to investigate crime or to stop crime that is underway. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll also talk about the flip side of FBI CJIS, and that is reducing opportunities for crime by doing background checks for authorized purposes. So here's a picture of the FBI CJIS facility here in Clarksburg. These two buildings are about 3.5 miles from my house where I'm talking to you from today. The upper building was built in '95. It's the main office of the FBI Criminal Justice Information Services Division. The bottom building is called the BTC, or the Biometric Technology Center. That's where the fingerprint files are held. And these two buildings, there's about 3,000 DOJ FBI employees that work here. It is the biggest division of the FBI in the nation. About 3,000 people work here, and it's the brains in many aspects. It's the brains, it's the databases of the FBI, and also for state and tribal criminal justice information. So the Tribal Law and Order Act was enacted in 2010, and part of what it did was it statutorily confirmed some of the practices that the FBI was already doing. But basically, it put it in statute, so it's permanent, to confirm that tribal criminal justice agencies do indeed have legal authority to access the systems. But the drafters of the Tribal Law and Order Act weren't satisfied with that. They wanted to take it a step further, and they passed this other section, which is codified today at 34 U.S. Code 411071, which says that the Attorney General shall ensure that tribal law enforcement officials that meet applicable federal or state requirements be permitted access to national crime information databases. That reference to national crime information databases means FBI CJIS information. But it's that the magic words shall ensure, two of those two words really push us forward in the Department of Justice to make sure that this isn't just an authority, but rather it's something that we encourage and help to grow to help make Indian country safer. One of the ways that tribal criminal justice agencies access FBI CJIS is through a database called the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. NCIC is the database that police officers in the field use. I know that nobody on this call has ever been pulled over by a police officer or anything like that, but if you had been, you might have noticed that the police officer took your driver's license and registration and then went back to his police car and got on the radio. Well, what they're doing is they're doing an NCIC check. When they go back to their car, they're doing an NCIC check to find out who you are. The NCIC has 12.7 million records. It's available to law enforcement, including tribal law enforcement agencies, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It includes information about wanted persons, missing persons, unidentified persons, domestic violence protection orders. The National Sex Offender Registry is in that database. Has information about stolen vehicles, stolen firearms, wanted terrorists, people who have arrest warrants out for them. All kinds of valuable information is there for the police officer in the field. This database is also accessed when they make an arrest and they take somebody back to the station to book them. They all want to be able to know exactly who they are dealing with and whether or not they're a wanted fugitive from their jurisdiction, etc. Now, the response time from the time that the inquiry comes from the local police department, or in our world, the tribal police department, from the time that electronic signal goes from the tribal dispatch out to Clarksburg, West Virginia, and then back to tribal dispatch, it's 7/1000ths of 1 second. So to the police officer in the field, it's almost instantaneous. There is little or no delay. That the delay is so small that in most cases a human wouldn't even notice it. That's the main database that tribal police use when protecting vulnerable people in Indian country. Another system you hear a lot about that is managed by the FBI here in Clarksburg is the National Instant Criminal Background System, also known as NICS. This system helps protect victims of domestic violence and victims of felony crimes. It's accessed by federally licensed firearm dealers nationwide to make sure that prohibited persons don't get firearms. In the Indian country world, there's a number of statutes that this applies to, but the three biggies I've listed here. One is that persons who are subject to a domestic violence protection order cannot possess a firearm anywhere in the United States, including Indian country, and yes, it includes tribal court domestic violence protection orders. That's 922G8. G9 is persons who've been convicted of domestic violence in any state, federal, or tribal court in the United States. And also anybody who's been convicted of a felony crime. And now that tribes can prosecute felonies under the enhanced sentencing features, we're seeing more and more tribes that are issuing conviction orders that are now nationwide firearm prohibitors. And so this system protects people in Indian country because if, let's say you have somebody who's a victim of domestic violence, the perpetrator is convicted in tribal court, and or there's a domestic violence protection order issued by the tribal court, that person cannot leave the reservation and go to a gun store, buy a gun, and bring it back to the reservation and shoot up the place, because if they are attempting to purchase that firearm from a federally licensed firearm dealer, it will hit off the system. Assuming that it's in the system, it will hit and reject, and that firearm dealer will actually get a notice that this is a prohibited person. Do not sell the firearm to them. And so this is another way that the criminal justice side of the system can be used for, I guess you could call it a non-criminal justice use, but it's a way to keep firearms out of the hands of people who should not have firearms and might otherwise harm people. Now, the NICS system can also be accessed by tribal criminal justice agencies to do background checks. More and more tribes seem to be doing their own firearm licensing, and tribes have legal authority to license firearms, possession, acquisition, transfer, concealed carry, things like that. And tribal police departments, tribal criminal justice agencies can access the FBIC just NICS system to basically do those checks to make sure that they are not giving a license to somebody who should not have a firearm license on the reservation. A couple of other systems that our tribal police officers tell us they like is the National Data Exchange. That's a system that allows for sharing information across jurisdictional boundaries, and the Law Enforcement Enterprise Portal, which has a number of investigative tools available to tribal law enforcement. And I'll tell a quick story about a recent success in Index from Indian country. We had a case from a tribe up in the Pacific Northwest some time ago, not too long ago, and a vulnerable elder from the tribal community had been kidnapped. and the tribal police did not know where the person had been taken. They suspected that the suspects had taken the vulnerable elder off the reservation, but no one was sure. And the tribal police officer had 2 or 3 names of suspects, one of them that he was really interested in, but he had no information about the suspect. They couldn't find an address, couldn't find a phone number, didn't know how to contact this person. And the tribal police officer went into the FBIC, just National Data Exchange System, and did a Google type search and ran a search on this person's name. And lo and behold, a off-reservation police department had that same person as a suspect in a different unrelated case. And in the case files, they had that person's address. So they went to the address and with the consent of the local police department and with them and went out there, and sure enough, the kidnapped tribal elder was being held hostage at that location, and they were able to safely recover that person through this national data exchange system. So that goes to show how law enforcement agencies can share information across jurisdictional boundaries to help protect vulnerable elders and others who might be in a bad situation. Now, the flip side, there's two, you have to think about FBIC just in two, that's like 2 columns. One is the criminal justice column. All those criminal justice uses are controlled by one set of laws, and they're accessed by name and biographical information. The other side of FBIC just is accessed by fingerprints, and it's used for background check purposes. And it is managed through a different set of laws and regulations that are completely managed differently. That system is called Next Generation Identification. If some of you may have heard of IAFIS, that's what it used to be called. Today it's called Next Generation Identification. And basically there's 78 million sets of criminal fingerprints in the system, so that if, let's say, you want to do a background check, we'll talk about some of the purposes that are authorized for tribes. Let's say you want to do a background check on somebody for an authorized purpose. You can submit fingerprints and find out whether or not that person has a child abuse conviction or a domestic violence conviction or felony conviction, something like that. Now, back in the old days, you would have to roll fingerprints on a piece of paper with ink on the finger, and then they would send it to Clarksburg, West Virginia, and it would take weeks to get back results. And if there's a smudged fingerprint, they might have to resubmit it, and then you're into it months. Today, it's all done electronically. Once the tribal fingerprint submitter has a good set of fingerprints, they hit send. It goes to Clarksburg, West Virginia, and the tribe gets a response in an average of 35 minutes. And they will then know that person's criminal history and whether or not they have a conviction that they should be worried about. We have some tribes that tell us they're getting responses in less than 5 minutes now, but the average response time is about 35 minutes. So what are some of the legal authorities associated with the background checks in Indian country? There's a lot of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them today because some of them some are more relevant to today's discussion than others, but there's a number of federal laws and regulations that help tribes access the FBI data for various background check type purposes. One of the ones that's most important, we call it 101-630. It's actually codified as 25 U.S. Code 3207A through C. Basically, it says that if a federally recognized tribe that receives 638 contract funding or funding from the BIA or IHS through a compact, if that tribe is hiring somebody in a position that would have regular contact or control over children, that not only is there authority to do the background check, but it's actually mandatory. The tribe has to do it. And so this category, this statute covers such things as teachers, doctors, nurses, juvenile probation officers, juvenile detention officers, anybody that a tribal government might hire that would have access to children. And there are certain standards that are set forth in federal regulation, and tribes can make even more stringent standards to help protect children even more. But this is probably, other than gaming background checks, which I'm not going to talk about today, this is probably the biggest one to help protect children in Indian country. Now, a question had come up a few years ago about foster parents. And there was a debate about, well, does this statute include foster parents or doesn't it? Because a lot of tribes don't hire foster parents, and a lot of tribes don't even reimburse foster parents. And so there's questions about that. And so Congress went back, and in 2016, they passed the Native American Child Safety Act and basically said, yep, we're going to add foster parents to the list. And so for foster parents, not only does the tribal social services, in working in conjunction with the tribal court, not only must they do the national FBI background check, but they should also check the state child abuse and neglect registries, the National Sex Offender Public Registry, and also tribal records and registries. And then that will hopefully give the tribal social services and the tribal court judge a closer view of exactly who it is that's applying to be a foster parent, and making sure that a foster parent is qualified and does not have child abuse convictions or other disqualifying convictions. The reason Congress passed this was this happened after a case from a tribe up in the Dakotas a few years ago, where a tribal court placed two toddler-age children with their biological grandmother and did not do a background check. And the biological grandmother proceeded to murder one of the children, and the tribal police had to rescue the other child before that child got murdered or abused. And when people started asking questions, it turned out that nobody had done a background check, and this grandmother actually had child abuse convictions in her background, so she never should have had access to children, but slipped through the cracks because nobody did a background check. So Congress says now we're going to make that a national requirement. Head Start, a lot of tribes have Head Start programs. There's a statutory authority for tribal Head Start to do background checks. Tribal housing authorities often do background checks for tenants to make sure that a lot of tribal housing authorities screen their tenant applicants to make sure that people don't have drug convictions or child sex abuse convictions or things like that, because they have restrictions on putting people like that in their tribal housing. And so there's authority for those types of background checks. Another question that came up several years ago, in fact, this is a true story. A tribe in Arizona called me several years ago, and they said, we want to do we had a situation recently where tribal police responded to a domestic violence call in the middle of the night, and the husband was arrested for domestic violence, and the mom was taken off to the hospital, and then there was minor children left in the household, and we didn't know what to do with them. And we knew that to do a non-criminal justice placement background check would require fingerprints, and it's 2 a.m. out in a rural area. We don't have a way to submit fingerprints at 2 a.m. What do we do? And so we talked about that, and we decided to piggyback off of an existing authority commonly known at the FBI as Purpose Codex. And basically it's a federal regulation that the FBI has promulgated that allows federal agencies to basically authorize a name-based background check. Say you run the person's name on the radio, and then submit the fingerprints for a double check later. And it became an issue in this particular case that I mentioned, because they didn't know what to do with the children of concern. And one of the social worker or the police officer or somebody said, oh, I know a relative family nearby. We should take the kids over there. And they didn't know what else to do, so they went to the relative's home and said, here's Sally and Susie, and we want to, can you watch them? Mom's in jail and dad's in jail and mom's in the hospital. Can you watch the kids until we figure out what to do for a more permanent foster placement? And they were just about ready to let the kids go into the house when the police officer saw somebody walk behind in the living room, and the police officer recognized that person as a convicted sex offender. And they said, "Oops, nope, we're not going to be placing the children in this family today." And so that's when the question came up. And so we talked to BIA about this, and they said we would be happy to work with the tribes um, to help them if they don't have authority to do this type of check. We will help them. And so tribes can apply to the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services, and if approved, they can get authority to have the BIA run a name-based check for them for emergency placement purposes. And then within 15 days, they follow up with the fingerprints for the residents of the home to make sure that the placement is a safe one for the children. So those are just some of the criminal justice purposes and some of the background check purposes that tribes use to access FBI CJIS systems. And once you get past the legal authorities, the next question that comes up is, well, how do you do, what's the physical means of access? And there's four ways that tribes get the physical access once that the authority has been determined. Most states go through the state, and there's actually a connection between the tribal police or the tribal agencies with the state database. And then when they run their background checks or do their criminal justice checks through the state, a signal also goes out to Clarksburg, and the FBI responds. So they get a state and federal response. Some tribes had difficulty getting access to the FBI system through their state. There was one state in particular that actually denied tribes access through their system. And because the state would deny them access, they couldn't get to the federal system either. And we had tribal police, tribal court judges, and tribal social service agencies flying blind because they couldn't get the information they needed to do their jobs. So we created the DOJ Tribal Access Program, which bypasses the state switch, and it provides a direct connection between the tribe and the FBI. And I'll talk about that in a minute. On non-criminal justice background checks for things like foster parents, doctors, teachers, people who have access to children, those kinds of things. Some tribes have opted to hire private channelers, which are private corporations approved by the FBI that have access and can help tribes get access and help them get the criminal histories they need for their applicants. And then lastly, the FBI allows tribes to submit the old style hard cards with the fingers rolled in ink. We don't recommend that anymore because it is so cumbersome and so slow and so inaccurate that we just don't. There's a few tribes that still do that for one reason or another, but we don't recommend that one anymore because there's so much faster and easier ways to do it. So the Tribal Access Program was launched in Tulsa, Oklahoma at FBIC CJIS Tribal Day in August 2015. It's run by the U.S. Department of Justice Office of the Chief Information Officer. We work in conjunction. That office works in conjunction with my office, which is the Office of Tribal Justice. We have funding from the SMART office, which is the Sex Offender Registration Office of the Department of Justice, the DOJ COPS Office, Office on Victims of Crime, Office on Violence Against Women, and then we work with FBIC CJIS and the tribes to make this work. And there's three parts to the TAP program. One is that DOJ serves as the CJIS systems agency for the tribes that participate. In other words, they don't go through the state to get access to the FBI. The connection goes from the tribe to the Department of Justice and the FBI that way. And basically, the Department of Justice assumes all the responsibilities that the states normally would provide for the tribes, and including providing training, onboarding and vetting, auditing purposes, and basically helping them to be able to navigate the system. The second part is we provide technology. There's two systems. One is called TAP Lite, which is basically software on tribal government computers. and those are often used by tribal law enforcement and other criminal justice agencies, including tribal courts, to check information and to enter information. And then the tap full is the same as tap light, plus it includes a camera, a video camera for bookings when the tribal court or tribal correctional facility is doing bookings. It includes the fingerprint scanners, so they can make those electronic fingerprints that are submitted to the FBI, and and basically has all the hardware and the software. And it's a much more expensive package, so we haven't been able to do. It costs a lot more money for us to do those. And then last of all, we provide the training and assistance that the tribal users need, that tribal government employees will be using the system. We're not going to just hang them out to dry and say, here's the system, go for it, hope you don't make a mistake. We give them all the training that they need. When COVID's not around, we're doing on-site training. We actually go out to the reservations and train folks. A lot of our training right now is done through online means, but we make sure that everybody has the certifications and training that they need to do their jobs right. Today, we have 99 federally recognized tribes that participate in TAP. I think that this particular map might not include all of the 99 because we awarded 30 tribes last year to participate, and because of COVID, they weren't all deployed. But as of there are 99 federally recognized tribes that participate. Some tribes have multiple agencies that participate. They might have their police, their prosecutor's office, their tribal court, social services, maybe their HR office for background check purposes. So most tribes have multiple agencies. And at last count, I think we had over 330 tribal government agencies that were using the TAP system, that were authorized to use the TAP system. So it's a system that a lot of tribes have found to be an effective way to make contact with the FBI system. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them here, or send me an email or give me a call. And if I can be of assistance, I will. And I will turn the time back over to Justice Thorne, and perhaps we will have some time for questions this afternoon.